All right, since we've been going through Genesis on Wednesday nights, and we made it all the way through Genesis chapter 4, we thought we'd have Audrey come in and speak on evidence for young earth and speak about dinosaurs a little bit. Audrey grew up at Parkland Chapel, and now she possesses a bachelor's degree in geology and geophysics, and she currently teaches labs on systematic paleontology and the evolution of the earth. And she's trying to pursue a doctoral degree to study dinosaurs and anatomical structures of dinosaurs. Her dream is to be a professor of geology and paleontology from a Christian worldview. Now, her education is to learn evolutionary theory and geology and such in order to have credibility when she presents, like she is tonight, on young earth and a Christian worldview. And so tonight she's going to present some scientific basis for the biblical account of creation, the age of the earth being young, which is other than what is widely accepted scientific theory, which makes me say this. Audrey is not anti-science. She is actually a scientist. And Christians should not be anti-science in my estimation, because God is omniscient, which means all science. So all science comes from God. And yet the rub is that when it comes to creation, all theories on creation take faith. And so for many, evolutionary theory, and that's what we're talking about with evolution, a theory, is actually a scientific religion as much as it is a science. And because of that, there's actually a lot of censorship within the scientific community of those with the Christian worldview. So for that reason, tonight we're not using Audrey's last name, and tonight we're not showing her video, just the audio. And this is not because Audrey's scared of her faith or sharing it. It's actually because she needs to pursue as much education as she can to have the credibility to speak a biblical worldview into this community. And so professors and or people who have been in the paleontology world from a Christian worldview have advised her that we do such tonight. So sometimes Christians that speak at churches get derailed from their academic pursuits by those in evolutionary theory who take offense, and we want to save Audrey from that so that she can go as far as she can to do this the rest of her life. Would you please give it up for Audrey?
Hope I turned this on right. Is that good? Perfect. Dang, I get the mic chair today. I'm excited. So just a little bit about me. I'm just going to give you some evidence for young earth that I've come into contact with, both as a scientist and a Christian. But just to go a little bit into my background. So like Mike said, my education is in geology and geophysics, but I specialize in sauropod dinosaurs. And so these are animals otherwise known as long-necked sauropods. And I bring them up not because I love them so much, I'm biased, but I actually believe an animal like this is described in the Bible. But I'll get more onto this later on. So before I say anything, there's one thing I want to make very clear. No theory of man, including creation theory, should take the place of God's word. And really what it comes down to is God's lens versus man's lens. In science, it's kind of like a crime scene. For example, paleontology. Your animals have been dead for a long time, and the bones have been strewn around. We got to figure out what happened. Well, unfortunately, the first-hand witnesses are dead, so we can't ask them. And so what we do is we take the pieces and come up with a hypothesis of what happened. Well, thankfully, God is a first-hand witness, and from a scientific point, that might seem a little crazy, but as a Christian, this has to be fundamental. And so I have a couple of verses that affirm the authority of God's creation and his word, but the cherry on top, I think, is this next one. So this is in John, and this is the word of Jesus, and he said, "For had ye believed Moses, ye would have believed me, for he wrote of me. But if ye believe not his writings, how shall you believe my words? So Jesus knew we were going to have an issue when it comes down to this, and he said, trust Moses. Moses wrote Genesis, so if Jesus says he's good to trust, then my goodness, we should trust him too. The first thing I want to tackle is the flood. This is probably one of the hardest things for people to understand, and Christians included, and it's understandable. Oftentimes when we think of the flood, we see this cute little drawing with a little cruise ship and some animals just waiting for the water to go down, but in the Bible, that's not very accurate. And so I have a video to show you, and it's a little difficult to see, but I highly recommend you take a deep look into it because it's showing you the catastrophic nature of the flood and how horrible it really was.
The Bible tells us that God looked upon his creation, and behold, it was all corrupt. For all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. Judgment Day had finally come. Even I do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under heaven, and everything that is on the earth shall die.
So let that sink in. That's probably a bit more intense than what you were thinking. And we actually see this in the geological record. So what you're seeing right here is a typical geological sequence. That's just nerd term for rocks in a layer. The words on your left are geological periods of time. So you've heard of Jurassic and Cretaceous. This is showing over millions of years the depositional sequences and conformities within North America. Within those, the Abracassoca and the Sauk, those are marine transgressions. And so as water goes onto land, it deposits marine sediments, and it's seen in this chart. So the black is the unconformities, which are erosional boundaries, and the depositional environments, or the marine sediments, are the yellow and white. Now, unlike modern secular scientists, the creation theorists see this as the year-long flood. And it makes sense. So the ark wasn't lifted up till day 40. And so unlike it flooding in 124 hours, it was actually a period of increasing tsunami-like waves. So the first layers would be fairly weak and flood the coast areas. Then it would transverse back. Then it would become much more powerful and go over more areas until about the Zuni sequence, which would have been the highest point in the flood in which the highest mountains were covered. But let's talk about Earth as a whole. Earth is comprised of roughly 5 sections. There is the outer lithosphere, which is the section that we live on. And going beneath that, we have the asthenosphere, mantle, outer core, or the liquid outer core, and the inner core. And how plate tectonics works is through subduction. And subduction is a process in which the lithospheric crust is pulled into the mantle. And basically, you have the cooler overlying crust. So in this case, it's an oceanic crust, and it's being pulled down into the mantle. How this works is that the older crust is going to be recycled and melted down so that new crust can be formed at mid-oceanic ridges. Here's an example of the model of plate movements, or for a movement of continents. So currently, continents are moving at about a few centimeters per year. During the flood, though, it said that the starting condition would have been a Pangea-like supercontinent. And then because the extreme forces from those mid-oceanic ridges, or fissures within the Earth's crust where the new magma is coming up and pushing out, causing the tsunami waves, would have been meters per second. This would have been catastrophic and needed. If these forces weren't increasing in strength, then the entire Earth could not have been flooded. And this is showing the continents moving from Pangea to their modern location within 70 days. So a lot more powerful and different than what you normally hear. All that to say, let's go back to those subducted plates. Why are those so important? Well, again, the process of subduction takes in cooler plates and warms them up to be recycled. Well, that's fine and dandy, but there's something very interesting, though. They've actually found many subducted plates that are actually too cold in their certain regions. For example, they found a subducted plate, which would have been about 400 miles beneath China, that still had a distinguishable top and bottom layer, meaning it's still so cold it actually has it warmed up to that surrounding mantle. One problem, though, it would have taken roughly 6 to 10 million years to reach this layer. If it's had that much time, why does it not even begin to warm up? In fact, why can we still see a top and bottom layer? That doesn't make a lot of sense. Another one, probably the most impressive and blows my mind, they've actually found additional oceanic slabs that extend into the outer core. Keep in mind, the outer core is known as the liquid outer core. It's actually so hot and so pressurized, liquid becomes a rock. But this subducted slab, nearly 1,800 miles beneath the surface of Earth, is still not melted. So the fact that we just have subducted slabs all over that are still too cold and have supposedly had millions of years to be subducted, that means they're too young. It means they're still too cold, and so it's only been a few thousand years and not nearly the vast amount of times that were given for subducted slabs. The next subject I'll be talking about is polystrate trees, but before that, I need to explain fossilization. Fossilization is a very rare event. You need specific conditions such as fast burial. If the animal or just the dead plant is not buried quickly, weathering and scavengers will break it up. This is an example of a fossilized tree, and one thing that's very interesting is that it's protruding through many layers. Now again, for fossilization, it needs to be quickly buried because the original material is actually being turned into a rock. So when you have a dinosaur fossil, it's not bone anymore, it's actually replaced by a rock. What's interesting about polystrate trees, though, is that they supposedly go through, in some region, layers that took tens of thousands of years to form. So slow geological process with layers accruing on top of each other for thousands or even millions of years. Just one problem, though. That tree could not have withstood that much time for all the sedimentary layers to accrue around it, meaning it had to have been deposited very quickly. There's a modern day example of this. So many of you were probably alive when Mount St. Helens erupted. The force was so strong it actually stripped trees and tossed them into Spirit Lake. Because they are trees, they float for a time until they start to become waterlogged. In the image to your left, which was an actual picture, it is showing them starting to go into a vertical orientation. So because they're starting to get heavy, eventually they'll deposit to the bottom. And because they're buried quickly, the entire tree will be preserved. Well, if I haven't blown your socks yet, I hope I'm about to. They actually have soft tissue in dinosaurs. So again, going back to the process of fossilization in millions of years, we should not have any detectable DNA or soft tissue structures, at least to the extent that we find them at. So we found red blood cells in a T-Rex. So this is an image of a T-Rex red blood vessel with a possible red blood cell. And they've also found collagen and bone cells. Now, how is this possible? If they supposedly minimum 66 million years, which is when the Cretaceous period ended, how can we find so much soft tissue? And then another issue we run into is carbon-14 dating. So if you go up to a scientist and say, hey, can we do some carbon-14 dating on this Diplodocus? They're going to laugh at you. The reason for that is that the amount of time that carbon-14 is present is roughly 60 to 70,000 years. And how this works is all throughout your life, you're taking in carbon-14 through your diet. Then once you die, the decay is going to start. And so carbon-14 is decaying into nitrogen-14. And how, as a scientist, how we try to determine the age of something is by counting the number of half-lives. So starting at the time of death, you have 100% carbon-14. Then as one half-life passes, meaning half of the original material turns into a daughter product, then by counting the amount of half-lives, we can gauge the age that the animal is. The one problem is they found carbon-14 in many fossils, including dinosaurs. Even to the extreme, they've actually found Permian animals, such as some lizards and fish, before dinosaurs supposedly evolved, still have present carbon-14. That's about 251 million years. So the fact that we're finding carbon-14 in not fully preserved dinosaurs where we can extract red blood cells and bone cells is really good evidence for a young Earth. Ooh, back to sauropods, I'm excited. So when we look at dead animals, not only do we try to understand what they look like, but we have to infer their behavior. There's just one problem. There's no sauropods walking around that I can go study, unfortunately. So what we use is comparative anatomy, and this is where we compare the behaviors of living or extant animals, not extinct, and by looking at their behaviors, this is the best way we can infer the behavior of ancient animals. So this is a recent documentary from a documentary showing two sauropods in a necking stance. And then here is a living one. And this is showing two modern-day giraffes necking. Oh, and by the way, necking for sauropods or giraffes is a lot different than Farmington teenagers. This is actually a very defensive stance. So what they do is they'll take their necks and actually whack each other with them. And the forces can actually be so strong it knocks out or even kills the opposite opponent. So by looking at these animals, we infer other long-necked animals such as sauropods likely did this. And this is what modern science is starting to reveal. Now, please stick with me if I haven't lost you yet. I'm going to show you some artifacts. And this first one is the Narmar palette. It was made in Egypt around 3000 BC. And what's very unusual about it is that it depicts two long-necked animals in an unusual stance. Well, looking back at our figure, that kind of looks like a necking stance. Now, in archaeology, they'll say oftentimes what we see are mythological depictions, and that's certainly true. You can't go in biased. That being said, if you look closer at it, we can see some modern-day animals, such as birds in the upper middle portion, or even a cow on the bottom part. So even if those two long-necked animals are mythological, there are still living animals we see today depicted on it. But let's just keep it at that. This is a cylinder seal. Again, if you look at it, we have two long-necked animals intertwined, but this is from a different location. It's from Mesopotamia, roughly 4,000 to 3,000 BC. That's kind of weird. Now, this one is my favorite. This is a funeral engraving from Richard Bell, who died in 1496, so 500 years ago. And you can find it at Carlisle Cathedral. And again, we have two long-necked animals that are intertwined. And I will mention, they do think this is not an actual animal, but there's other types of animals that are found on that enamel. So why do we have, and those three arrows are the general location of those artifacts, why do we have 3 different cultures, 3 different times, and 3 different locations creating artifacts for different purposes depicting the same behavior? Again, comparative anatomy is how we use living animals to infer the behavior of extinct ones. The fact that these are so detailed likely means they saw them or heard of them and recorded that in their architecture or artifacts. So here's the human perspective. If dinosaurs have been dead for millions of years before humans supposedly evolved, how could humans have described and drawn them in such detail over vast amounts of time and space? Well, keep in mind, different cultures from around the world have described creatures from different mythological tales, such as dragons. And the reason for this, many people will be like, well, if dinosaurs in the Bible, why the heck they don't call it a dinosaur? Dinosaur wasn't a term till the mid-1800s. So prior to that, cultures would have used different names to describe those animals. This is a dragon depiction from Babylon from the Ishtar Gate, likely built around the time of King Nebuchadnezzar II, so we're fairly familiar with that guy. But again, it's a depiction of a dragon-like creature within their culture. So now I'm going back to my sauropods, the biblical evidence. So in the Bible, it describes an animal known as behemoth, and it's in Job chapter 40, verses 15 through 24. Keep in mind, this is after the flood of Noah. It describes this creature eating grass like an ox. So this thing was a vegetarian. It describes as being extremely powerful, so much so when it goes through a river, it doesn't care, it just goes on through. And another really distinctive characteristic is the tail. It describes it like a cedar. So these are not the Missouri cedars. Think of the cedars of Lebanon. These trees can reach a height of roughly 100 feet and a diameter of 6 feet. So when they saw this animal, they would have understood right away what it was describing, and the tail was a very key giveaway. This is an image, a human compared to a titanosaur, one of the biggest land animals that ever walked the planet. And if you look at it, it really fits the description to a T. Now, many people will say that the Job description could be an elephant, for example, and that's true. It's a very powerful animal. It's a vegetarian, but there's just one problem, the tail. The tail is nowhere near as dramatically described in Job, but what does fit it better is the sauropod description. And my species in particular, the tail was actually so powerful, they use it like a whip. And some say that it could have actually broken the sound barrier. So these were very powerful animals. The next one is Leviathan. So Leviathan is used both metaphorically and literally in the Bible. Because of how descriptive it is in Job, it's talking about an actual animal. So again, going back to Job chapter 41, verses 1 through 34, it's describing a very powerful animal, and it describes its teeth and its ferocity. But of particular interest is the outer scales. It says, "Who can remove his outer coat? They're shut up with like a seal, and no air can get between them." Another interesting aspect is that the he-men of the day with swords and spears could not kill this thing. If they saw it, they ran for the hills. So this thing was tough to kill. Another note is it actually describes the underside. So this animal was both terrestrial and marine because it describes walking on the mud. And it was so jagged on the belly, it said that when it went on to the bank, it actually left very distinctive marks. Now, this is describing an animal very familiar to a crocodile. But this isn't your normal crocodile. This is Machimosaurus rex. This is the largest known currently saltwater crocodile, and I double-checked this with Mike, so if I get this wrong, take that up with him. This lives supposedly close to where Job lived. If you'll see in the image to the left, it was roughly 30 feet long and weighed 3 tons. So this thing was longer than a bus, and I wouldn't want to run into it. What's also very helpful about it, and based on living animals today, we know they have outer scales called osteoderms. Osteoderms are protective scales that prevent things from hurting the animal. And another particular note, if anyone has seen Swamp People, you'll see how difficult it is to hunt an alligator, and for good reason. They're powerful and they're tough to kill. Well, based on this animal and based on living animals, we know that when an alligator goes onto a bank, they leave really distinctive marks in the mud. Well, this guy is just a bit bigger, so he fit to a T. And on the right, that's the North American counterpart. So even America had giant crocodiles. And just to give you a size reference, the white skull is a modern-day alligator. So this animal has the size, power, and the scales that's described in the Bible, and there's even a species close to Job. Now, true, bones can tell us a lot, but there's a lot we don't know. So one main hiccup is that many people will say the Leviathan in Job is known for shooting out flames or smoke. We don't see a lot of alligators with flamethrowers on the nose, so it's a little tough to tell. That being said, animals today can tell us a lot because we can experience them. In fact, there's actually an insect known as the bombardier beetle that actually has a very flame-like defense. So if you're really interested in this, I recommend that you look it up. But let's just look at some bones. So you're going to be paleontologist for the day. You're walking along and you find these 2 fossils. And by the way, you don't find fossils this good. You might have like a leg or a foot, and that's all you got. But what if I told you the animal with the creepy long tail on the left actually has a very stinky defense? And the animal on the right that's all coiled and kind of creepy can actually generate an electric current. Well, I hate to burst your bubble. These aren't modern-day monsters. It's a skunk and an eel. Bones could tell us a lot, but if that's all we had and we weren't able to watch them in real time, we wouldn't know that. So the fact that the crocodile doesn't have supposed areas for flame to come out of its mouth does not automatically disprove it. Now, it really just comes down to this. Is the Bible factual or metaphorical? So one thing I really think is so amazing, and maybe I'm nerding out because I'm a rock person, but in Genesis chapter 7, verses 11, it describes the fountains of the deep. So up until about 1977, we had the discovery of hydrothermal vents. This is an image of a black smoker, and what hydrothermal vents are, and they're found in association with mid-oceanic ridges, so again, that mantle coming up, forming new crust, they'll actually spew out superheated fluid, and it's that black particles of it, once they come into contact with the cold water, they actually precipitate into columns. Well, that was really fine and dandy to come up with, but science didn't know about that. But hydrothermal vents are actually the leading theory for the emergence of life. So, it's not a black smoker, but they rely on a white smoker or alkaline hydrothermal vent, and that's what's used currently today as the leading theory for the development of life. There's just one kind of interesting feature about that. Modern humans didn't even know about this, so how on earth could the great fountains of the deep, possibly including a hydrothermal vent and a mid-oceanic ridge, the bottom of the ocean, how could people thousands of years ago describe this in such detail when even within my parents' age, when they were kids, they just found this feature? This is just showing, again, that the Bible is reliable, and when we discover something, it's already been mentioned. And one thing that's also really incredible is that the probability of life being generated. So it actually takes more faith to believe life came about on accident. So, for example, we have a single-celled organism, which would have been one of the first advanced life forms apparently on Earth, and it has around 438 proteins. One protein is necessary for a cell to function. You take one out, the whole thing falls apart. Keep in mind, humans are much more complicated than a single-celled organism. The probability of all those proteins coming about by accident is 10 to the power of 109,938. That's a big number. But to put it in Midwest terms, that would be like you going out to the Powerball and winning almost 13,000 times in a row. So that would be a great probability to have, but that's kind of hard to put your faith in that. And so, yes. So I apologize if this is a little heretical. Again, blame Mike. He's the one with my Bible humor. But sometimes I can't help but think Jesus looks at us. He said, you can trust Moses. You can trust my word. And then oftentimes we're like, man, I think we're from single-celled organisms. I know it. God couldn't have done it. We have to explain our theories. But I just want to leave you with this. Your faith stands up to the most intense man-made theories. Theories are changing, and that is fine. But the Bible is being proven again and again through science, archaeological discovery, and paleontological discoveries. And just the biggest thing I want to leave you with, if you can't trust Jesus' statement of Moses, then holy cow, what are we putting our faith in? So really, that's just what it comes down to. And if you're interested in any of the information I talked about, I have a reference sheet, or if you have any questions, I'll just stick around and we could talk about dinosaurs, because I haven't made that clear. I like those a little bit. But that's about all I have for today, but I think I'm going to close this out in prayer. Father, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to be home with my family. Seeing how much it's grown is truly a treasure, from 2 metal buildings with the skunks in them to the beautiful building with all the amazing people. I just want to say thank you for that. And I just pray that they can just take this information and be strengthened by it. Even though we're told that science and the Bible can't coexist, it's actually quite the opposite. And the more we study creation, the more we just have proof for you. Amen.